Good morning, Julie Perigo.
Good morning.
It looks a very sunny day there in Barcelona.
It is. We're probably a few days into spring now, so it's beautiful.
Let's talk about, and here's my copy, winners in the second half. Can you tell me a little bit about how you came to the need for winning in the second half?
Delighted to. Yes, I'd trace it back probably 12, 15 years now even, when I was working in executive search. That was back when I was in Australia with Korn Ferry, working with senior executives. And I found that candidates and clients that I'd known for several years, every time I met them, they'd be saying, yep, my 2-year plan, my 5-year plan, etc. is this. And then somehow I was beginning to notice that once they hit their 50s, they really changed on that. When I said, so what's your 2 or 5-year plan? They were a bit like rabbits in headlights. You could see that was getting more indistinct, a bit less firm, less eagerness about it. And I thought, what's going on here? Why is that changing in the 50s? And of course, with myself moving towards that age, a husband who was nearly 10 years older as well, that all made me realize it's a different era we're living in, and we've all got different challenges now in our 50s about work and life.
What exactly is the second half?
Well, as I think that statistically with each year that passes, we're more likely to live to 100, give or take. So anything over 50 is the second half as far as I'm concerned. And there's a lot of it.
There is. Do you think there is enough support out there for those in the second half? Is that why you wrote the book?
Well, it's interesting. I think actually there is enough support. I mean, there's organisations like yours, like mine when I was running Reinventors. What I don't think there's enough of is awareness, recognition, and empathy for what that stage of one's life actually entails.
It's an interesting stage. I mean, you talk about transition into the second half not being about transition into retirement, but more a transition into reinvention. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely, because whilst I was thinking and, sort of getting my head around talking to you today, I realised that I think is the crux. The obvious part of reinvention is, what do you want to do going forward? Is it something new? Is it something you want to go back to and explore that you didn't before? Is it just a sort of a smorgasbord of things you want to try? Those are sort of the obvious bits of reinvention. But before you get to that stage, I think that there's a lot about reinvention that's about unlearning. It's getting rid of self-limiting beliefs. It's questioning the sort of role models or attitudes that are prevalent. I think you've got to do a fair bit of unlearning in the reinvention stage before you can really find what you want to do going forward.
That's really interesting, the sort of unlearning piece. I mean, when you've worked with individuals, have you found quite a lot of this?
Absolutely. And, call it unlearning, call it self-limiting beliefs. There's the attitude that even takes, people by surprise. I found myself doing it too. Oh, at this age, I can't. Or at this age, they wouldn't let me. And you go, stop up short. I need to question that. There's also, I think, because we're talking of a transition away from the normal workforce pattern we've been used to for years, we've also got to question all that stuff about if you're not working, you're not valid. If it's not about money, it's not real. It's not real stuff. If you're not being pressured, it's not right. So and that's what we've been fed during our work life, especially the more middle management, senior management. Pressure is great. Intellectual stimulation, which can often be just manipulation for getting you to work further hours. It's all about that. And then what I've found with a lot of individuals, when they either choose or perhaps are pushed into the reinvention phase, they find it quite guilt-making to have time to, dare I say it, start enjoying themselves. Because a lot of what we're brought up to think is, if you're enjoying it, it can't be good, it can't be real, it can't be successful.
It's interesting what you say about validation there. I mean, I know in the book you talk about where do I go from success. People have been used to achieving well in their career, and then they come into this next phase and they might not be doing so well. They might be faced with some career wane. And as you say, there are certain expectations put on us and we have to unlearn them. Okay, can you talk a bit more about that? Where do I go from success?
Yes, because there are loads of things to consider in that there's that sort of often enforced wind down period, or wane, as you say, in the 50s, where somebody who's been used to climbing the ladder suddenly finds they're plateauing. They're not being offered the opportunities they were. It becomes a vicious circle. They lose a bit of confidence, and the longer they're plateaued, the more likely they are to be perceived as, they've lost their drive, they're not going as hard as they were. No, of course they're not, because they're not being given the new opportunities and responsibilities. So there's that kind of wind down, that wane. And I think at that stage, that's where we need the support and the empathy for, well, actually, it's not going to go back on the old track again. So how are we going to shape the future?
So that's really the big question, how do we shape the future? So what are the key challenges of this second half in shaping this new future?
Well, that word shaping itself, when you look at most people's careers, it's not so much their own choice. They're often offered promotions, or they're pushed into another job because of restructuring and redundancy. Probably for the first time in 30, maybe 40 years, it's an opportunity to go, well, I've got the chance to shape this. And in fact, if I don't shape it, nobody else will. And how you choose to do that, and I think what you mentioned about support, I do hope that perhaps our generation will have more empathy, more support for helping people shape, because, we're not finished yet.
No, we're definitely not. I know in the book you're very strong on having a game plan, which is something we share. I really do believe that if you want to be successful, you need to know where you're going. So do you want to talk a little bit more about why creating a game plan is important?
Well, because I think also a lot of people are familiar with having some sort of 2 or 5 year plan. But they tend to throw it out when it looks like the work world might be finishing. And actually, now is a time to look at a game plan even more broadly, about dividing up what areas of your life do you need to concentrate on. What areas do you want to spend more time on, less time on? What areas can you start spending time on at all that you never did before? What are you going to put in there? it's also useful as a communication tool, I think, because if you can have a game plan that you put on paper or on your iPad, it's something you can share with other people to, you know, get their buy-in, get their ideas, etc. Probably one other thing I'd say about the game plan is you've got to be flexible with it. Your game plan isn't going to take you through to 97, but you can look at 6 months, a year, 2 years, and you know it's a rolling plan. As you move through it, you review it, you move it out. I think maybe some people want to try and sort out the next 30 years all in one go, but life's not like that at any point.
No, that's true. So before we close, thank you very much. Is there a real nugget of advice that you would give us for someone who is approaching the second half?
Yes, well, possibly two things. I think the key to a good second half revolves around purpose.
Mm-hmm.
In work, when one was in the full-on work phase, sometimes it was the title, the success factor, the money, the I've done another step further that seemed to be the purpose. I think for a small percentage it was a genuine purpose, and maybe for a lot of others it was a pseudo purpose, and their real purposes and yearnings in life were outside, or perhaps were being hindered by being at work. So the second half, I would say, is about refinding that purpose. Is it building a legacy? Is it going back to something you always enjoyed? For me at the moment, it's teaching and coaching. Is it about developing spirituality? Is it about family and community? Some sort of purpose. And the more I thought about purpose should not be a chore, it should be an enjoyment. And I think that's also one of the challenges for us in the second half, to allow ourselves freedom to enjoy this time we've earned and to enjoy the new things we're getting involved in.
Thank you very much for sharing those insights from Winners in the Second Half.